For some reason, when I tell people that Terry Pratchett's Discworld consists of over 40 roughly interconnected novels, not written in series order, with more characters, plot lines, and crossovers than the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they tend to get a little bit intimidated. And that seems crazy to me, but I also just finished reading these books, and I can recall that before I had read them, they all seemed kind of daunting. And so today, I have brought you down into my basement, and you're not going to be leaving until I've explained all of Terry Pratchett's Discworld. For those of you who are Discworld curious, my hope is that this video will make all of it kind of make sense in terms of how it fits together. For those of you who have already read Discworld, I hope that this will be a fun little refresher course and a little walk down memory lane. And for those of you who know nothing about Discworld and just have this playing while you're doing your dishes, perhaps by the end of this video, I will have convinced you to give this Terry Pratchett guy a try. Now, I didn't just bring you down to my basement to give you that just been kidnapped ambiance. It's also because my giant bulletin board / tabletop is down here, and we're gonna be making use of it. I have done a ton of arts and crafts to prepare for this video, and I really hope that the visual learners appreciate it. I also didn't realize that my pants are the same color as this board, but now looking into the viewfinder, I look like a floating torso. To begin with, we're gonna go through all 41 Discworld books in publication order, and I'm gonna try to limit myself to one-sentence descriptions of each of these books, because as the people on my Patreon know, if I am allowed to talk about this for an unlimited period of time, I will just keep going. And as we go through each of these books, I'm going to categorize them into genre. Now, of course, all of these books, largely speaking, are comedic fantasy fiction. They're fantasy because they take place in a world that is fantastical, and they're funny, even though they get very serious at times. But within that larger umbrella of comedic fantasy fiction, Terry Pratchett explores a lot of different sub-genres. And I think that by choosing 2 genre descriptors for each of these books, it might help you guys to get a better idea of how they feel and whether or not you want to read them. Plus, it means that I got to make even more visual indicators. I made myself little sticker sheets. But before we get into specific books, let's talk about the world, because it is a disc. It's a big old dinner plate-shaped planet that balances precariously on the back of 4 elephants, which in turn are balanced on the shell of a massive turtle. But beyond the shape, the Discworld is a lot like our world, except the major differentiation is that narrativium, the transformative power of stories, is at work. This means that the princess will always be nudged towards the ball, the 1-in-a-million chance is quite likely to work out, and for better and for worse, the stories tend to tell themselves. The first Discworld book was The Color of Magic, published in 1983. In this book, a dropout of the wizarding university, Unseen University, is hired by the tourist Two-Flower to see all the fantasy genre marvels that the disc has to offer. I would definitely qualify this one as a parody, especially of 60s and 70s genre conventions, and it is an adventure. And I will show these closer up if you can't see them from here. I will also provide a key for what all of these symbols mean at the end, and linked in the description. The second book came out 3 years later in 1986, and it was called The Light Fantastic. Following up on The Color of Magic, in The Light Fantastic, the world is about to end, and Rincewind and Two-Flower are somehow the only people capable of stopping it. I would also say that this one is a parody and an adventure because it keeps up the very light, parody, picaresque tone of the first novel, and they do an awful lot of traveling. Now, we didn't have to wait 3 years for the next entry because in 1987, Terry Pratchett published Equal Rights. Yes, spelled like this. Equal Rights is the story of a little girl who is accidentally given the powers of a wizard, and she's gonna need the help of the old powerhouse witch, Granny Weatherwax, to find her place in that male-dominated field. I would actually qualify Equal Rights as a buddy comedy, which here we have represented by 2 hands being held together. because you kind of get the whole two unlikely companions going on a journey and coming to understand each other better, and I would call it a satire, which is represented by a little jester hat. This one is more specifically a cultural and societal satire. Later that same year, the fourth Discworld book, Mort, came out. In this book, Death himself hires an apprentice named Mort in the hopes of finding himself and finding some company for his adopted human daughter. I would call this one an adventure and also a coming of age. And check out this image I got for coming of age. A small person get big. It's perfect, no? Now, these first four books were not explosively successful, but they were successful enough that Terry Pratchett was able to quit his day job and begin writing full-time, which means that following these, which were about a year apart, we got a period of incredibly explosive productivity, like Brandon Sanderson levels of productivity. And the next year, in 1998, we were back with the Wizards for Sorcery. In Sorcery, a proud wizard bestows inhumanly powerful wizard magic upon his son, and that wizard prodigy comes to the Unseen University to take over the university and the world. I would say that this one is an adventure story because Rincewind is involved and he is always running off into some kind of an adventure, and then it's also kind of a coming-of-age story. Also in 1998, we got Weird Sisters, which kind of acts as a sequel to Equal Rights. Our old friend Granny Weatherwax and two of the other witches in her coven are thrown head first into a grand Shakespearean drama when the king is killed by his scheming brother, and they are the only ones capable of making the story end the right way. This definitely counts as a parody, especially a parody of Shakespeare's stories, and I would say that it's beginning to lean a little bit more into drama, which we have the little masks for. In 1989, Pratchett published Pyramids, which follows Tepic, the prince of a distant desert kingdom, when he is forced to leave assassin school in the big city to become the new king and drag his kingdom into the modern era. This one definitely counts as a coming of age for both Tepic and his kingdom, and while I toyed around with calling this one sci-fi, because I think you could make that argument, I think that action is more appropriate. So we have little swords. Later that year, we have number 8 in the sequence, Guards, Guards. When dragons begin appearing in Ankh-Morpork, it's up to Samuel Vimes and his incompetent city watch crew to get to the bottom of it. Since I don't think I mentioned it before, Ankh-Morpork is the big city on the disc. It's kind of like New York, Paris, Venice, London, Berlin, every really big and kind of gross city crammed together into one. And Guards Guards definitely qualifies as a crime mystery, handcuffs and a magnifying glass, and every once in a while it does kind of border into a film noir vibe. Next up, in 1990, we have Eric, or Faust Eric, if you want to say it like that. This is a picture book written by Terry Pratchett and illustrated by Josh Kirby, in which a 13-year-old wannabe demonologist accidentally summons Rincewind instead of the wish-granting demon he had intended. This one is a parody on other demon summoning classics like Faust, hence the title, and there's also a good deal of adventure. Also in 1990, number 10, Pratchett published Moving Pictures. In this one, the alchemists of Ankh-Morpork have learned how to record pictures that move, and the sacred site of Holywood becomes the setting for a cinematic revolution. This one is a parody of early Hollywood, especially the film industry, and it's a really acute pop culture satire. Even though it is satirizing older tropes, it is still very relevant to a lot of Hollywood stuff today. In 1991, we have Reaper Man. Death is laid off for poor work performance, and while the rest of the world flounders, unable to die, Death searches for meaning in the human life he's always wanted to live. This one is really unique because it ends up being a kind of slice of life at a lot of points, and yes, I did represent that using a bread slice, and there is a hefty amount of satire about consumerism and consumerist culture. It's also kind of a zombie book, so take that as you will. Also in 1991, in that same year, Witches Abroad came out. In Witches Abroad, one of the coven members, Magrat, is named a fairy godmother, and with her wand, she heads off to the enchanted city of Genua to set some fairy tales straight, accompanied, of course, by her two busybody coven members. I would call this book a buddy comedy of sorts, and then I also said that it was a fairy tale. And I don't know if that technically counts as a genre. I suppose it is kind of a parody of fairy tales, but it is very specifically in that it is still a fairy tale. It's kind of like Shrek, but like, 10 years before Shrek actually came out. In 1992, we get Small Gods. In Small Gods, the great god Om is manifested upon Earth as a rather sad little tortoise, representative of waning belief in him, and he and his one true, rather dumb follower must figure out what belief truly means. I would call this one a buddy comedy because Brother and Om are really awesome frenemies and they have such a fun relationship, and a lot of the comedy arises from that relationship. And I would also call it satire, particularly satire about religion. This book has a lot to say, both good and bad, about organized religion. Also in 1992, Lords and Ladies was published. Fairies have come to the kingdom of Lancre, and the witches are going to have to learn how to work together and work with themselves if they want to save their kingdom. I would call this one another fairy tale parody kind of thing, and a drama. Now, up until this point, as you can see, Pratchett was doing about 2 books a year, but after this point, his productivity did slow slightly. A book a year is still pretty good. Men at Arms came out in 1993, in which a diversity program forces Sam Vimes to add dwarves, trolls, and even women to the city watch force, just as they're put on the case of a string of mysterious murders. Now, this one is probably the most film noir out of all of Pratchett's books, so it's definitely a crime mystery. But it should be noted that there's a fair amount of clowning in this one. In 1994, we have Soul Music. Death abandons his post, leaving his granddaughter Susan to take up the scythe, sending her right into the heart of Ankh-Morpork's burgeoning music with rocks in it scene. This one is absolutely a parody of rock and roll music and the music industry as a whole, but it also has an awful lot to say about pop culture and, satirizing it. Interesting Times was number 17, and it was published in the same year, 1994. Trapped between the wills of battling gods, Rincewind is shipped off to the distant Agatean Empire to get far more involved in politics than he probably should be. Now, I know that I am breaking up my beautiful grid here by not having this one go here, but I promise there is a method to my madness. And this one is a pretty classic Rincewind story, so I'd call it a parody and adventure. Pratchett published Masquerade in 1995, where we see the young witch Agnes Nitt going off to follow her dreams at the Ankh-Morpork Opera House, which is reputed to be haunted by a strange phantom, and the witches of Lancre must follow her to bring her back home where she belongs. Look, I said that I would describe each of these in one sentence. I never claimed that it wouldn't be a run-on sentence. This one is a parody of The Phantom of the Opera. There's my parody thing, but it's absolutely also a drama. In 1996, Feet of Clay came out. Trouble is brewing with the rise of robotic golems in Ankh-Morpork, and as more and more people show up murdered, it's up to Sam Vimes and the City Watch to get to the bottom of it. And this one is, true to form, a classic mystery and crime procedural kind of thing. Later that year, we hit roughly the halfway point of the Discworld with Hogfather. When the Auditors of Reality try to eliminate the Hogfather, the beloved bringer of gifts every Hog's Watch Eve, Death and Susan may be the only ones able to save him, and save the belief and whimsy of children everywhere. This definitely qualifies as a Christmas book, or technically a holiday book, if we want to get specific, and I don't know if that counts as a genre, but I think that it should, because I don't know how else to describe it. But it also has a lot of satire, especially satire about charity, consumerism, and a lot of the issues that arise around our modern commercialized holidays. Jingo was published afterwards in 1997. In Jingo, the empires of Clatch and Ankh-Morpork have been neighbors for years, But as tension builds and war threatens to break out between these two nations, Sam Vimes and the City Watch are going to have to get involved. Now, this one breaks the mold of the typical Watch book, and instead of being a crime mystery, I would call this more of an action with quite a bit of political and social satire. And in 1998, we got The Last Continent. Rincewind finds himself in the land of 4X, destined to bring back the long-awaited rain to this land of kangaroos and sheep. This is classic Rincewind, so there's an awful lot of adventure and parody, specifically of Australian culture and Australian cultural tropes. Later that year, Pratchett put out Carpe Jugulum, which of course means seize the throat. Vampires are taking over Lancre, and the witches are gonna have to get past their personal and interpersonal issues if they want to be able to drive them out. I very loosely classify this one as horror, hence my teeny tiny ghost. But it is kind of more of a parody on horror and gothic tropes, so take that as you will, but on top of the goofs, there's also a lot of really intense drama in this one. Next up, in 1999, we have The Fifth Elephant. In this one, Sam Vimes is sent on a diplomatic mission to Uberwald, where he gets far too involved in the politics of dwarves. The Fifth Elephant is a lot of mystery, and I would also call it a political thriller. And I know that this icon does not represent political thriller very well, but Canva doesn't have any good clip art for political thriller, so we just get standard thriller, which, you know, I'm gonna take what I can get. Now, it should be noted that as of the year 2000, Terry Pratchett hired on his personal assistant, Rob Wilkins. And from this point onwards, he wrote most of his books through dictation. In my opinion, it doesn't majorly change the way that the books feel or are read, but I think that it is worth noting. In the year 2000, Terry Pratchett published The Truth, which follows William de Worde, the world's first newspaper editor, as he begins the world's first newspaper. And with the help of a photography-loving vampire and a crew of printing dwarves, they find themselves the only people capable of saving Lord Vetinari's reputation. By the way, Lord Vetinari is the city's leader, or patrician, as they call him, and I would qualify this as a mystery for that reason, but I would also call it a political thriller, I think. It's a bunch of people getting together and pulling something off in a satisfying way, and I don't know what to call that. 2001 was a huge year for Pratchett. We actually have 3 different books published, and the first one was Thief of Time. In this one, the auditors are at it again, trying to stop time in order to clean up humanity's act, and Death and Susan must join forces with time-manipulating monks in order to put a stop to it. I don't know if time travel counts as a genre, but I'm saying that it does, and then this one is also a coming-of-age story. We then get the second illustrated short story, The Last Hero, this time with illustrations from Josh Kirby. In The Last Hero, Cohen the Barbarian, the leader of the legendary and octogenarian Silver Horde, is about to end the world, and some of Discworld's finest will stop them, even if it means a trip to mankind's final frontier. This one is, however unlikely, a space adventure story, which is surprising and also very fun. And then although I considered calling it a parody because it does parody, you know, Conan the Barbarian, I think it qualifies more as an action. And then also in 2001, we have The Amazing Maurice and His Educated Rodents. In this book, which is one of my favorite novels ever, Maurice the Talking Cat and his team of talking rats, assisted by a guy named Keith, get in over their heads while pulling a Pied Piper scam. The Amazing Maurice is a really fun mystery novel, and although it is technically written for kids, I think of it as horror because it dives into, I think, some of the darkest themes out of any of Terry Pratchett's books. It's not like outright boo scary horror, but it is existentially and philosophically very, very dark. This also marks the beginning of what I like to refer to as the elite run, because the next, I think it's 5 books, are some of my favorites that Terry Pratchett ever wrote right in a row. I tell you what, when you get to this part of reading chronologically, That's a good time for me. In 2002, we get Night Watch. Ankh-Morpork is being terrorized by a serial killer and is simmering towards a revolution, and Sam Vimes finds himself transported into an eerily similar situation, the revolution that young Sam Vimes fought in 30 years prior. My orangutan fell down. My librarian. Nobody breathe or he's gonna fall again. This one is a really beautifully done time travel story, and although it has a lot of drama and a lot of really deep societal critique, I would say that it qualifies as action. The next year, in 2003, Pratchett came out with The We Free Men. In this one, Tiffany Aching, the wannabe witch, must take off into fairyland to rescue her brother from the Fairy Queen, all alone except for her trusty frying pan and a rowdy crew of tiny blue men. Now this one is technically, very technically, a young adult novel, but it's a Terry Pratchett young adult novel, so I promise that if you are an adult man, you will still definitely enjoy this book, although it is a coming-of-age story and it has a fair bit of fairy tale. In 2003, we have number 31, only 10 more to go, with Monstrous Regiment. In the backwards nation of Borogrovia, Polly Perks must break all the rules, disguising herself as a boy, to join the army and save her brother. I would call this one military fiction, which I looked it up, and it is a thing, and it's satire, especially when it comes to societal satire and critique about gender roles. A Hat Full of Sky was published in 2004, in which Tiffany Aching sets off to learn magic and finds it rather unmagical, except of course for the disembodied monster that's after her very mind and soul. This one is definitely still a coming of age, as you will see as a trend in Tiffany's books, and I would call it a school story. So we've got some school books here, just because a lot of it is dedicated to Tiffany learning how to become a witch. You can kind of look at it as Terry Pratchett's answer to Harry Potter, except that it's a lot better. Also in 2004, we have Going Postal. In Going Postal, convicted con man Moist von Lipwig is tasked with saving Ankh-Morpork's derelict postal service. I also got kind of sick of hopping up and down, so I'm gonna be here for the time being, where I'm realizing that no lighting is catching my face, which is just great stuff. I really struggled with genre for this one, because it is a heist. You know, it's a clever con man pulling off a scheme. However, instead of like stealing from the powers that be, he's just creating a functional postal system. So it's kind of a parody on heists, but I still count it as a heist, but like a reverse heist. I don't know, here's a picture of a little guy stealing money, and that represents heist. And I would count it as a political thriller as much as any of the things that I've counted as political thrillers have technically counted as political thrillers. You can tell I'm a consummate professional. Number 34 is Thud! Which came out in 2005. As ancestral tensions rise between the dwarf and troll communities of Ankh-Morpork, it's up to Sam Vimes and his team to solve the murder of a dwarf before full-scale war erupts. This is absolutely a mystery, but I would say that it lies more on the side of a thriller than on the side of a crime procedural. So we're going mystery and thriller. Next up, Wintersmith was published in 2006, in which Tiffany Aching accidentally makes the spirit of winter fall in love with her, and she has to find a way to put it right before the land is trapped in eternal winter. I am also going to categorize this one as coming of age and a school story, even though this one does start leaning more into drama than previous Tiffany Aching entries. Now, as I sit on this chair, you see the true reason why I left this indent for. It is the space for me on this board. Now, in 2007, Terry Pratchett went public with his Alzheimer's diagnosis. It was early onset Alzheimer's, and it was a really aggressive form, and so all of the books that I'm gonna have in this bottom row are shaped or touched in some way by his Alzheimer's and the effect that it was beginning to have on his mind. Now, that's not to discount any of these books in the last row or to say that any of them are bad. In fact, a lot of these are some of my all-time favorite Discworld stories. is worth keeping in mind that some of these are affected by the cognitive decline that he was experiencing. In 2007, Pratchett published Making Money, in which Moist von Lipwig is once again tasked with putting his con man skills to use in order to get the greatest scam of all up and running, the Royal Bank of Ankh-Morpork. This is, once again, a bit of a reverse heist kind of a thing, and I'd call it a thriller. Next up, in 2009, we have Unseen Academicals. In this book, football, that's soccer for us Americans, arrives in Ankh-Morpork, and the wizards of the Unseen University find themselves having to compete without the use of magic. Now, this one breaks the mold a bit in that it is a sports story, but it's also a satire on pop culture and sports culture and university culture and that kind of thing. I Shall Wear Midnight came out in 2010. In I Shall Wear Midnight, age-old prejudices against witches begin bubbling up, and Tiffany Aching has to cut down that evil at its root, or allow it to consume her whole. This one is also a coming-of-age story, but much like The Amazing Maurice, despite technically being a young adult book, it's really dark and really horrifying and has some of the most psychologically unsettling concepts out of all of the Discworld books, so I qualify that as horror. And then in 2011, we have Snuff, in which Sam Vimes tries to take a holiday to the countryside and finds himself entangled in the dark politics of goblin exploitation. I'm down here now. This one is a mystery and a political thriller, but it should be noted that it's very well rounded out with a lot of drama. 2013 gave us number 40, Raising Steam. And you might think that Moist von Lipwig has enough on his plate at this point, but when the steam train is invented, he can't help but be swept away by the wave of progress. This one is still that reverse heist kind of a thing, but I would say that it leans more action-adventure than the kind of close-quarters thriller that the other Moist von Lipwig entries were. And then on March 12th, 2015, Terry Pratchett died. He was taken by his Alzheimer's, but this would not be the end for him. Before he died, he managed to get most of the way through writing one final Discworld book. And so in 2015, number 41, The Shepherd's Crown, was published. In The Shepherd's Crown, the ancient evil of the Fae is rising in the land once more, and Tiffany and all of her friends must do everything in their power to save the world that they love. The Shepherd's Crown has all of the laughs and a lot of the fun of all of these other novels, but I would say that it is primarily a drama. And of course, it is one last beautiful coming-of-age story to close out this excellent series. So now that we have everything laid out with all of our symbols, I'm gonna scurry out of the way and put my key up just in case you want a screenshot. I hope that was long enough because I'm coming back because there's still plenty more for us to talk about. I also, I feel like I've been hunching every time I've been standing through this whole video, and that's because there's something right here and I keep feeling like I'm gonna hit my head on it. But it's fine, don't worry about it. As you can see, there is a massive amount of variety to be found in Terry Pratchett's works, but there are some overarching overall trends you can see, especially when it comes to genre. The first half or so of the books, until roughly around this point of the board, most of those are parody, and the first couple, this first row, are a very specific and precise kind of parody that's bordering more on spoof. Now, in the middle years, this tendency towards parody developed into a really rich kind of satire. He was using the tools he had honed writing parody to deliver really scathing cultural critiques. And then later on, while Sir Terry continued to play with genre and tone, he wasn't quite as tightly tied to parody, and he played with a lot more different forms of storytelling, and a lot of different types of comedy. We get more fully developed dramas, we get more complete characters, we get better written plots. Discworld continues to be a kind of funhouse mirror of our own world, but towards the end of the series, it had developed into its own fantasy world that could certainly stand on its own legs. And because he was willing to wildly switch up the style and the content of his books really early on in his career, Terry Pratchett maintained that kind of freedom throughout all of the books that he wrote, and we're left with a very wide, very diverse range of stories to choose from, to the point where I kind of think that there is a book in here that will specifically resonate with everyone. It'll be a different book for everyone, but I think that there is one for everybody. Now, as you may have noticed, there are recurring characters, places, and ideas within Discworld. You might even call them sub-series, and you may have also noted that I have them helpfully color-coded here, so let's go through each one. To begin with, we of course have the Wizards, which here I have depicted in purple. These books almost always star Rincewind, the wannabe wizard, but they also heavily feature other characters from his university and the wacky wizards that you find there. Beyond Rincewind, we have characters like Mustrum Ridcully, the stuffy university chancellor, his erratic bursar, and the university's librarian, who was turned into an orangutan during the books and decided to stay that way, because it made for a much simpler life. This series tends to discuss the particular magic and science of Discworld more than the other books. It's more picaresque and adventurous. They travel a lot more, and you see a lot of the strange corners of Discworld, and it leans more into that parody spoof tone than a lot of the other things in Discworld. And although the wizards do appear in a lot of the books, especially the ones that deal with magic and the ones that are set in Ankh-Morpork, their specific series goes as follows. It is The Color of Magic, The Light Fantastic, Sorcery, Eric, Interesting Times, The Last Continent, The Last Hero, and Unseen Academicals. The next series we are introduced to is The Witches, which I have here color-coded in green. The Witches series follows, of course, the witches, generally at the very least Granny Weatherwax, and it centers on their little mountain kingdom of Lancre. While these books all star Esmeralda Weatherwax, the witch with a backbone of steel, they also typically feature her best friend and polar opposite, the jolly, loudmouthed, and eternally inappropriate Githa Og. There's other witches too, the young wet rag spiritualist Magrat, and the vocalist extraordinaire with a dark secret Agnes Knit, but Granny Weatherwax and Nanny Og are the consistent points. The Witches subseries tends to focus specifically on stories themselves. A lot of the time, the thing that they are competing against is the power of narrativium, but they also discuss a lot of issues around right, wrong, good, and nice, and they get into the idea of what it means to be a witch, and how that very rarely actually involves any magic. They're a little bit more dramatic in tone, and the characters and storylines tend to be a little bit more focused than, say, the Wizards. The Witches series begins in equal rights, technically, but it really hits its stride with Weird Sisters, and then carries on with Witches Abroad, Lords and Ladies, Masquerade, and finishes with Carpe Jugulum. But those characters are not quite done yet. Don't worry, we will get to that. Our next series is Death, starring naturally, Death himself, and obviously they got black as their color-coded color. The Death books always center on Death as the main character, the Grim Reaper himself, the harbinger of all mortals' doom, and his struggles with his job satisfaction. Other reappearing characters in the Death books include Albert, who is Death's butler, and his daughter Isabel, and his granddaughter Susan, and of course, little companions such as the Death of Rats. The Death books are really richly philosophical, questioning the existence of time, one's place in the universe, and getting into ideas of the power and importance of belief. And while Death is everywhere on the disc, his dedicated books are Mort, Reaperman, Soul Music, Hogfather, and Thief of Time. Our next series is the Guards or the Watch books, here presented in orange. These star Samuel Vimes, captain of the Ankh-Morpork City Night Watch, and his crew of both competent and entirely incompetent City Watch people. This ever-evolving cast consists of people like Fred Colin, who's very sturdy but also very stupid. We have Carrot, Iron Founderson, who is a boy who was raised by dwarves and didn't realize that he wasn't a dwarf until he was like 15 years old and 6 feet tall, and of course the infamous Nobby Nobbs, who is so horrifying to look at that he has to carry around a special card that says that he actually is human, despite what your eyes may be telling you. Later editions, like the werewolf woman Angua and Detritus the Troll, round out this incredibly colorful cast of characters. Often presented as crime novels, the Watch books deal with issues of justice, leadership, and the way that a society runs. Although these books are very comedic, and some of the scenes in Men-at-Arms have never left my mind ever since I read them, these books tend to have a slightly more dry, morbid sense of humor, and as they move on through the series, they get more and more intense and dramatic. In terms of the sub-series of Discworld, I think that the Guards might be one of the best structured in terms of internally inside of the series. The way that the characters grow and the way that they build out the world is just really beautifully done. And the Watch series goes as follows. We start with Guards, go to Men-at-Arms, Feet of Clay, Jingo, The Fifth Elephant, Night Watch, Thud, and Snuff. Now, our next major series we aren't introduced to until way later, and those are the Tiffany Aching books. These center on Tiffany Aching, Witch in Training, and they're a definite offshoot of the Witches series. You can think of it as the Witches of a new generation. Thematically, the two series are very similar. They're both focusing on witches, and a lot of the characters from the Witches series, especially Granny and Nanny, end up heavily featured in the Tiffany Aching stories. But still, Terry Pratchett very beautifully adapted the tone of the Witches books into something that is suited for young adults, because Tiffany Aching is technically a young adult series. Although Tiffany starts out very young, the books really grow with her. Not just that she's getting older, but the themes and the maturity of the writing grow with her. And in that way, this one competes with Guards for the best structured as a singular sub-series, although Guards beats them out just slightly, just because there's a lot more of Guards. These books begin with The Wee Free Men, and then go through A Hatful of Sky, Wintersmith, I Shall Wear Midnight, and finish with The Shepherd's Crown. Now, there is one more series for us to talk about, and that is generally called the Industrial Revolution, which I have here in red. These books star Moise von Lipwig, conman turned government worker, and a bunch of other really fun characters like Mr. Grote, the ancient postman, and Stanley, the boy who's obsessed with pins, and Adorabelle Dearheart, the chain-smoking golem social worker. These books are massively fun and electric, containing themes of societal progress, government bureaucracy, and the functions of society at large. They are funny, they're action-packed, and out of all of the books in this series, they are the most gripping to me. And these books are as follows, just 3. It's Going Postal, Making Money, and Raising Steam. Now, those 3 books are generally accepted to be the Industrial Revolution books, and they are their own series. However, in my mind, I do count a couple of others in the larger series that I think that the Moist books are part of, which I call the Something New Comes to Ankh-Morpork series. As the title defines, there is a whole category of books in which something from our world is introduced to Ankh-Morpork, and we get to see the fallout from that. Notable inclusions are Moving Pictures, where movies come to Ankh-Morpork, and The Truth, where they bring the newspaper to Ankh-Morpork. But there could also be an argument made that books like Reaper Man, where the mall arrives, soul music with rock and roll music, and then there was one more that I was thinking of. Am I thinking of The Last Hero because space travel shows up? Either way, those books technically and much more solidly belong to their own series, but I did put The Truth and Moving Pictures in pink because I do see them as precursors to the energy and the excitement that we have in the Industrial Revolution books. That is not officially sanctioned by the Pratchett estate or anything, but I figured I should share my theories because what is a conspiracy board for? But sharing theories. Now, you may have noticed that there are a couple of books here that don't belong to any series, and I have them in yellow here, and that's because Pyramids, Small Gods, Amazing Maurice, and Monstrous Regiment don't belong to any series. These are true one-offs. They do occur in the same place, they occur in Discworld, but some of them take place in parts of Discworld that we never encounter again, and although there's a little bit of character cameo and crossover, they are one-offs. You are introduced to these characters and then that's pretty much all you see of them. So those are the ones that I have in yellow. So now that all of this has been laid out, you may be asking yourself, how do you read these? And you know, you look at the page and you turn from one page to another, but I also get what you mean. Where do you start with all of these 41 books? And the thing is that there really is no right way. A lot of people start with The Color of Magic. However, The Color of Magic is very different to what the rest of the Discworld would become. In fact, Sir Terry Pratchett himself recommends that people don't start with The Color of Magic because he improved radically, even from the first book to the third or the fourth book. And sometimes people start with The Color of Magic, are turned off because they don't find it engaging or don't find it to their taste, and then abandon the rest of the series because they think the rest of it is going to be like that, even though The Color of Magic is not a great example of the rest of the series to come. I do want to say that these books are good, The Color of Magic and The Light Fantastic, and they are worth reading. However, because of the difficulties of them and the fact that they aren't as good as the rest of the stuff, they are not one of my recommended starting points. That being said, reading in publication order definitely does have its benefits. You get to see Terry Pratchett grow as an author as you read, and these characters and this world starts to layer up on itself, and you will never see a reference that you don't understand because you've been with this story since the very beginning. However, if you are going to read in publication order, that's a 41 book investment, and unless you've already had something to get you into the series, I doubt that many of you want to make that investment right off the bat. So publishing order is not necessarily my recommended reading order. The next option is to pick a series and go with that. So you might pick Equal Rights, or Guards, or Mort, or The Wee Free Men, and just read through that series and then go from there. Now, that's an absolutely fine way to do it, although I would say that if you want to start with the Witches series, Weird Sisters might be a slightly better entrance point than Equal Rights, just because Equal Rights is good, but those books don't really hit their stride until Weird Sisters, in my opinion. So if you're gonna go through the Witches, I suggest you start with Weird Sisters, but that's just me. I do think that reading in a series order, picking a series and reading it, is a really great way to go because you can just pick something that interests you, and it does feel like a more traditional fantasy series where you're sitting down and reading these books. And of course then, if you want to start a different series after that, you absolutely can. My third approach is possibly controversial, and that is grabbing a book from anywhere in here and reading it. Now, if you're going to do this, the one-offs are a really great place to do that. I specifically recommend Small Gods or The Amazing Maurice and His Educated Rodents, because Pyramids is a little bit early days and a little bit complicated and not the best that Terry Pratchett ever is, and I think that Monstrous Regiment does benefit from having read a couple of other books before it. So I'd say if you want to pick a random book, and you only want to read one book, Small Gods and The Amazing Maurice, you really can't go wrong. Those are both incredible books for very different reasons. Okay, but one-offs aside, I'm gonna be a little sacrilegious and point out that you can just literally pick up any of these books and start reading, and you're gonna be okay. If one of these books, no matter where they are in a series, caught your attention and you said, I kinda wanna read that, read it. You could walk into a library or a used bookstore and pick up the first Terry Pratchett book you see and start reading, and you're probably gonna have an alright time. Because of the way that these books were published, kind of out of sequence, or at least not in series order, Terry Pratchett is very careful to make sure that he properly introduces these books and the characters in them. Every book he predicted that you would have forgotten what happened in the last book, and he's gonna make sure you get, you know, up to where the story is beginning, and so that means if you're coming into this fresh without knowledge from any other books, you're still going to be able to get most of what's going on. And in a way that so few modern novels do, Terry Pratchett really properly wraps up every single one of these books. They have a satisfying ending, and you don't necessarily have to read the next book in order to feel like the book that you just read was worth reading. Of course, the more that you read, the more running jokes you'll get, the more characters you'll be excited to see from other books, and the more you're going to get the picture of Discworld as a whole. But by reading out of sequence and slowly working through it, you still get that experience, and on later read-throughs, especially if you read in chronological order, you're gonna get so many more Easter eggs, which means the reread value on this is gonna be so great. I am personally a huge proponent of the just read whatever method because that was the thing that got me into these books. I started with the Tiffany Aching books because I was already familiar with them, and I read through that whole series, going up before The Shepherd's Crown. I saved The Shepherd's Crown for later, and then I think that I started in on Going Postal, and I read the first two Moist von Lipwig books, and then I think I bounced to a couple of different one-offs. I read the first, like, 3 Witches books. I dipped my toes in the Death books. I started in on the Wizards books. And then I decided to do a full read of the entire series. But I started out with just reading whatever caught my interest. However, if the concept of just hitting shuffle and grabbing a random book makes you nervous, I did create a quiz, which I will link in the description, where you can go through the 12 questions and it'll tell you which Discworld book I think you should start with. And you should go take that quiz because I spent a lot of time making it, and let me know what your results were in the comments. I also feel that I should note that Discworld really lends itself well to the audiobook experience. That was how I first experienced these books, and all of them are pretty short. They're all sub 10 hours, I believe, which for an audiobook, if you're an audiobook listener, you know that's pretty fast. And although they get into heavier subjects, they make for pretty good light reading, you know, whether you're driving or working, walking or working out, or folding laundry like you probably are right now. But even then, if you do want to read the paperbacks are small, they're pretty cheap, and they are readily available at a lot of different used bookstores. And so I recommend you just grab one and start reading. Even if you haven't done a lot of reading lately, give these books a go. I promise they are perfect for sitting at a train station, sitting on a train, sitting on a bus, being at a party that you don't really want to be at. They're great light reading, and they manage to drag you into the darker and deeper themes so effectively. If you ever wanted to cry in public, this is a great way to make that happen. This is my call to just start wherever you want, read wherever you want, because I promise one of these books is gonna hit you like a freight train, but like, in a good way. Now, after trying to make this all seem simple and understandable, I am about to complicate this a lot more because I want this to look like an actual conspiracy board, and the only way to do that is to start talking about running characters. We are going to go through all of the major running characters in Discworld, who they are, the kind of stuff that they do, and what books they appear in. Quick warning, I think that technically speaking, there will be spoilers ahead, if you do consider, like, knowing that somebody appears in a book to be a spoiler, then I will be spoiling the rest of these books. And so if you want to skip ahead to my conclusion, the timestamp for that is right here. It should also be noted that this is going to be done to the best of my abilities. I didn't have time to sit down and reread every single one of these books just to track down mentions of specific characters, so this string theory thing is going to be compiled to the best of my personal knowledge. And one last disclaimer, I can't talk about every character I have picked and I have chosen, and I'm sorry if your favorite character is the Luggage or like Letitia, but I can't track every character, and so I'm just choosing the ones that I want to talk about. I don't know where my scissors are. I know I had a pair, but I've lost them. Hang on. I got scissors and now my hair is falling down. I'm a mess. Okay. Now that I have myself together, we are going to start with the least recurring characters and go to the most recurring characters, just to add to the chaos. Mort is one of the first characters we're introduced to in the Death series, along with Isabel. Mort is an insecure young man who ends up as Death's apprentice, and Isabel is Death's precocious daughter, and the two appear in Mort. They may be mentioned in Reaper Man, but they do not appear again until Soul Music. And then that's it. That is the only 2 points where Mort and Isabel appear. The only other character that we have that only appears twice is Escarina Smith, the girl wizard who appears in Equal Rights, and then, spoiler alert, she also does make a cameo in I Shall Wear Midnight. The insurance salesman turned tourist Two Flower ironically appears in 3 novels, the first 2, and then he is a major character in Interesting Times when Rincewind ventures into the home of the Agatean Empire, which is a play on East Asia. Lutze, the history monk, also appears 3 times, first in Small Gods, disguised as the humble sweeper at the monastery, and then later in Thief of Time and Night Watch, as a monitor of timelines. Susan, who is Death's granddaughter, is a really fun character. Despite her whimsical backstory, she's a very serious person, which means that when she's pushed out of her comfort zone and forced to, participate in whimsy, it's really fun seeing her grow. She appears in Soul Music, Hogfather, and Thief of Time, and I would that she had another couple of novels, because she deserved them. The Queen of the Elves, or Fairies, if you want to say it that way, appears 3 times, beginning, I know this, in Lords and Ladies, reappearing in The Wee Free Men, and then showing up again in The Shepherd's Crown. Although the Queen of the Fairies starts out as a kind of generic, classic evil fae queen, she develops a lot, and I end up really loving her as a character by the time she's developed through The Shepherd's Crown. Moise von Lipwig and his crew, Stanley, Mr. Grote, Adora Bell, and the other folks at the post office only appear 3 times throughout the Discworld, which is a little bit surprising because they loom very large in my mind. They're some of my favorite characters of all time, and I think that if I had it my way, we would have gotten to spend a little bit more time with them outside of the Industrial Revolution subseries. Cohen the Barbarian is a really fun character. He is a play on, obviously, the barbarian character archetype, but it begs the question, if the hero can never be beat, what happens when the hero is an old man and is still alive and fighting? Cohen is introduced in The Light Fantastic, he recurs in Interesting Times, and he makes a cameo in Jingo, and he is a protagonist in The Last Hero, considering he's, the titular last hero. The newspaper crew of The Truth is one of my all-time favorite Discworld gangs. Led by William de Word, there's also Saccharissa Crisplock, the sassy and competent reporter, my beloved Otto, the vampire photographer who vanishes into a poof of dust when the flash of the camera hits him, and a whole crew of printing press running dwarves. Although their only dedicated novel is The Truth, they make cameos and are briefly mentioned in Monstrous Regiment, Going Postal, Making Money, and Raising Steam. Tiffany Aching doesn't have that many appearances in the larger disc, mostly just because she was introduced a little bit later in the series, but the appearances that she does have are awesome. She is one of my favorite characters. She's the model clever little girl, the kind of person who reads the dictionary back to front and knows a lot of words that she doesn't know how to pronounce. She wants to be a witch not for the magic and the fancy hat, but because she wants to follow in her granny's footsteps and help those that need to be helped. She's a character that starts out very interesting and grows to just be so incredibly, beautifully powerful in who she is, and she appears in The Wee Free Men, Hatful of Sky, Wintersmith, I Shall Wear Midnight, and The Shepherd's Crown, her series. Feagles are Pixies, not pixies, and they would try to kill you if you ever got those two confused, even though they're only 6 inches tall. Feagles think that they've already died and that the disc is their afterlife, so they fear nothing and spend their days drinking, stealing, fighting, and generally being a horrific nuisance. Despite that, they are frighteningly loyal, incredibly helpful in a tight situation, and definitely the kind of people that you want on your side versus fighting against you. Our first Feagle, Wee Mad Arthur, appears alone in Feet of Clay. The full regiment of Feagles is introduced in Carpe Jugulum, and then they are main characters in all of Tiffany's books. Gaspode the Wonder Dog is, as you may have guessed from the name, a dog. He is a mangy little runt who has survived only by virtue of the fact that he can talk and think, and he has learned human psychology very well. He understands that humans think that dogs can't talk, and so anytime that they hear a dog talking, they'll think that it's just in their head. So he can say things to them like, hey, look at that cute little dog over there, he looks like he needs a treat, and they'll think it's coming from their own minds. So Gaspode is a smart little man. He makes his entrance on the Hollywood scene of moving pictures, and then becomes a recurring character in Men-at-Arms. He appears in Soul Music, Feet of Clay, Hogfather, The Fifth Elephant, and The Truth. Leonard of Quirm makes for such an incredible bit character. He's a play on Leonardo da Vinci, and he's an incredibly talented artist and inventor, and he spends almost every single book locked in a basement by Ankh-Morpork's patrician, Lord Vetinari. You see, Leonard has a knack for developing weapons of mass destruction, that if the wrong people got their hands on them, it would mean the end of the world. And so understandably, Vetinari keeps him on a pretty tight leash. But of course, he's happy as long as he's given drawing supplies and someone to do his laundry. Leonard of Quirm is first mentioned in Weird Sisters, and he reappears in Men-at-Arms, Soul Music, Jingo, The Fifth Elephant, The Truth, The Last Hero, and Monstrous Regiment. Next up, we have Rincewind. Come on, you know him, you love him. He's the world's most prolific coward, the leading expert in skedaddling away, and just an iconic part of Discworld lore. Rincewind gets his start in The Color of Magic and The Light Fantastic, and then reprises his role in Sorcery, Eric, Interesting Times, The Last Continent, The Last Hero, and Unseen Academicals. Next up, we have my eternal beloved Death of Rats. In Reaper Man, while Death is gone, all of the other animals of the world have to create their own versions of Death, and so Rodentkind creates the Death of Rats. AKA the Grim Squeaker, this guy shows up to shepherd rats and other rodent-like creatures to the next life, and I simply adore him with everything that I have. He's introduced in Reaper Man and makes appearances in Small Gods, Soul Music, Masquerade, Feet of Clay, Hogfather, The Last Continent, Carpe Jugulum, Thief of Time, and The Amazing Maurice and His Educated Rodents, often accompanied by his translator, the Raven Quoth. You know, Quoth the Raven. Next up, we have the witches, and I am simply going to discuss them as an entity because I just dropped a pin, and I'm going to step on that later, and there's simply already too many ribbons on this wall, and I don't want to visually confuse it any more than it's already confused. Granny Weatherwax is someone who's completely predisposed to evil, who has, against all odds, chosen to do what is right. Granny's not really nice, nor is she particularly pleasant, but she has chosen to do the right thing over and over again, even when it's tough. She is stubborn, unaccommodating, bitter. She can hold a grudge like nobody's business, and she uses rage as a weapon. But she is also incredibly competent. She is kind, even when it is difficult, and in her own very particular way, she is so loving. She's first introduced in Equal Rights, but she really comes into her own in Weird Sisters. Our first coven members are Granny and Nanny Ogg, Esmeralda Weatherwax's childhood best friend, an old woman with at least a dozen husbands, a huge heart, and a great voice for singing songs that make you cringe, and they're joined by Magrat, a damp, overly enthusiastic witch who has too much love in her heart for pretty little witch-themed trinkets. The three feature together in Equal Rights, Weird Sisters, Witches Abroad, and Lords and Ladies. After that, Magrat becomes busy with other things, and so we are introduced to Agnes Knit. Agnes Knit is brought in Lords and Ladies, although she doesn't join the coven until later on, and she's introduced as a witch who just doesn't really want to be a witch. She's actually created an alternate personality who lives inside her mind, who is a much more aggressive, confident, and self-assured version of her. The version of her that she would be if she was not so already predisposed to taking care of pigs and sick old people. Agnes joins in the coven of Granny and Nanny for Masquerade and for Carpe Jugulum. Although they take more of a back seat and they only make a cameo in the We Free Men, Granny and Nanny and some of the other witches that are introduced in the earlier witches books are a constant presence throughout Tiffany's books. And honestly, as much as I love the dedicated witches books, I kind of love the people that they become in the Tiffany Aching books even more. And then in the end, for Shepherd's Crown, we get a reunion of all of our old characters, from Magrat to Agnes, and it's incredibly sweet. Our next most recurring character is Cut Me Own Throat Dibbler, or Seamot Dibbler, the disc's most infamous salesman. A fixture of city life, Seamot Dibbler can be found around every street corner and in every public gathering, selling something. Whether it's sausages of dubious quality, or miracle hair products that don't actually grow your hair at all, or the music industry itself, Seamot Dibbler is always there ready to sell you something, and he'll even give you a pretty good discount, even though that's basically cutting his own throat. Dibbler is introduced in Guards Guards. He becomes the world's sleaziest Hollywood producer in moving pictures. He appears in Reaper Man, Men-at-Arms, Soul Music as a terrible band manager, Feet of Clay, Jingo, The Truth, Night Watch, Making Money, Unseen Academicals, and Raising Steam. Dibbler is actually such a universal constant that there's different versions of him that appear in different places, such as in Small Gods, in Omnia, we get Cut Me Own Hand Off Dibbler, and then in Interesting Times, we have Disembowels Himself Honorably Dibbler, and also I think there's one in The Last Continent. But those are Dibbler duplicates, so I don't know if those count as Dibblers. And I didn't think to put the ribbon on them, so I'm not going to do that. Next up, we have Sam Vimes and the City Watch. And yes, I could trace those characters individually, but quite frankly, I don't want to. And soon my housemate's going to get home and I have to let you out of the basement. Samuel Vimes is a deeply cynical and yet eternally hopeful man. He desperately wants humanity to be better than it is, and as his series goes on, we see him becoming more and more the kind of person who can help people become better than they are. In their first book, Guards Guards, the City Watch consists entirely of Carrot Iron Founderson, Nobby Knobs, Fred Colin, and Sam Vimes. They're also frequently joined by Sybil Ramkin, who, whenever the guards show up, Sybil is involved. Moving into Men-at-Arms, we add characters, Men-at-Arms is right here, we add characters like Angio the Werewolf and Detritus the Stupid Troll, and then Feet of Clay also brings us characters like Cheery Littlebottom, the dwarf who wants to express herself as a woman, and Dorfel, who's a golem. These characters all continue through Night Watch. Also Jingo and the Fifth Elephant. I forgot those, this is fine. And then also in Going Postal? I'm pretty sure. In Making Money. This is getting complicated, I'm running out of room. In Unseen Academicals, and majorly in Snuff, and partially in Raising Steam. Oh, and you know what? Some of them also do appear in Monstrous Regiment, so we're just gonna make that look intentional, right? Oh, you know what? They make a cameo in I Shall Wear Midnight too. This is fine, I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. I've been down here for hours. And all my batteries are dying. Lord Vetinari is an incredibly present character in all of Discworld. He is the patrician of Ankh-Morpork, a cold and calculated leader. He's the kind of guy who would legalize crime because at least it means that it would be under his control. And somehow, underneath his leadership, the city runs like a well-oiled machine. Vetinari is arguably introduced in The Color of Magic. There's a lot of debating around that. There is a patrician of the city that they encounter. It's not specified if it's Vetinari or the guy that comes before him, but in the Color of Magic movie, which was Terry Pratchett approved, they did have him as Vetinari, so in my mind, it might as well be Vetinari. I'm not gonna read him out, just observe the passage of the string while you listen to some lovely music. Hey, buddy! How's it going?
You are
do you like my wall?
Wow.
Yeah. Do you like it? I will point out that just being able to see the back of you, you do look like a pirate. Because you got the striped shirt.
Arr.
Okay, so for this next one I had to bring in help, and I've already put the string on the board, and my roommate Bridget was down here because she got home and I'm losing my mind. We're gonna talk about the wizards next. The wizards of Unseen University are peak Pratchett. Bumbling and far too self-confident, they see themselves as the pinnacle of the wizarding world, the sole thing standing between the disc and chaos, despite the fact that most of the time they are the thing that is causing the chaos. Notable characters from this gang include the Arch-Chancellor Mustrum Ridcully, the Dean the Bursar, the Librarian, who has since fallen from his place of grace, Ponder Stibbins, and Hex the Computer. The wizards appear in almost every video where there's magical trouble or magic involved, and so it's most of them. It's most of them. It was like half of the things, and I'm not reading them out loud because it took me like 5 minutes with my roommate reading them out to me, so you don't want to hear that. Now there is only one more character who could be as prolific as the wizards, and that is, of course, Death. Death is one of, if not the most iconic Discworld character. He is the human fear of death personified, and although he is a spirit of sorts, he is also beautifully, magnificently human. He likes cats, he wants to work at a fast food joint or on a farm, and the fact that Pratchett made Death a comforting, familiar, and so beloved presence is kind of a miracle in itself. And Death appears in every novel except 2, The Wee Free Men and Snuff. Hey, I don't know if you found this part of the video valuable. I'll be honest, I mostly just wanted to have a thumbnail that looked like this, but also I thought this would be fun. Plus, if you ever want to do a read-through of Discworld where you only read the books with Cut Me Own Throat Dibbler in them, here is the guide for you. I think that if I was to make a point with this crazy exercise I just did, it would be just how beautifully lived in Discworld is. There is an insane range and variety to these characters, and nearly all of them are given plenty of time to shine, whether it's in their own books or across multiple books. If there is one word I could use to describe Terry Pratchett's writing, it would be prolific. He just wrote so much, and it's incredible that almost every single one of these novels manages to be fresh, engaging, philosophically rich, and unique. And you know what's really cool? This isn't even everything that Terry Pratchett wrote. He wrote a bunch of non-Discworld novels, and he wrote some Discworld short stories and additional Discworld material. There's just so much to dive into. And if you only want to read one, that's perfectly fine. But if you want to read all that Discworld has to offer, that's also an incredible experience. Discworld is not the kind of thing that would sell easily in today's world. In today's publishing industry. It's not a trilogy. There is next to no steamy romances. And from the outset, it can seem kind of difficult to get into. It is hard to categorize into a couple of neat Instagram tags. There are a lot of fandoms that are very particular about precisely how you should read and consume the stories that this fandom loves. Trust me, I know, I'm part of the Tolkien fandom, but the Discworld fandom is really not that. It is rich, it is complex, it is dark, it is so important, but it is also deeply unserious. So go forth and read Discworld. I hereby declare that you are allowed to leave my basement. But wait, before you go, leave me a comment letting me know where your favorite place to start reading Discworld is if you've already read it, the book that you recommend that people start with, and if you have not read Discworld, let me know what book you might like. Give this video a like to support, crazy manic videos like this, even though they're usually more professional. This was kind of a fun one to do. And subscribe if you want to come back every week for content that might not be as crazy as this, but hopefully it's just as educational. Thank you so much for joining me today in my basement, and I hope that you have a very happy, hobbity day.